Well, thank you so much for finally talking to me, agreeing to have a little conversation with me. I really do appreciate that. I don't really like being judged and being spoken of in a manner, especially by people who don't know me. And I understand it's a weird thing with social media.
Mhm.
But I think like when we choose to put ourselves out there, we have to be open to criticisms and different opinions and what have you, right? I don't even remember what the hell we were talking about in the very first thing. And that was like too much scrolling for me. I'm like, I can't be bothered, to be honest. But whatever we were talking about, at some point I had said, I'm open to having a conversation with you anytime, right? And you basically responded, the gist of what you responded was, you don't want to talk to me because I'm, argumentative and rude and what have you. And I'm like, well, that's not fair because this is Twitter. I'm limited to what I can say, and I'm trying to get complex thoughts into a minimal space. And I have to cut certain things. And even to me, sometimes I'm just like, this is not exactly what I want to say, but it's as close as I can get. And so I understand how perceptions and disagreements can occur. But I do want to make clear that at no moment to me is it arguing with somebody. I'm genuinely just trying to have a conversation, but it's not a way to have an actual conversation, right?
So the reason why I didn't want to have a discussion, like a live discussion, is not so much because I was scared or anything, or because we were disagreeing. I think the reason was that the first thing like you sort of wanted to have a talk on is about when I did like a language debate thing, and I was talking about child language acquisition and then adults or whatever, and then you responded basically saying that there's no debate, like there's just research and there's proof and stuff. And what I responded with was that in linguistics there's not such thing as proof and facts. To clarify, there is to some extent proof and fact, because when we are talking about phonology, we can place sound in our mouth because that's quite physical. But anything that's out of the physical sort of ground is not something you can factually prove. And the way you responded was like, okay, I'm going to obviously exaggerate, but it was something like, do you realize that you didn't start language learning as a research? I'm like, yeah, because I've got a master's in linguistics. The reason is that we wouldn't be having an equal conversation, because on the one hand, I would be using like research and like actual experience of linguistics, and you'd be using opinion. And it's not saying that opinion doesn't have value, but we just wouldn't be arguing like with the same sort of starting point. So that wouldn't be an equal conversation. And actually I was discussing with Kelly E. Wright, the one that she does racial linguistics. And I was asking her, like, was I wrong to say that? And then she just responded that, well, no, because technically speaking, you can't actually prove things that have to do with the brain, because it's not something you can actually, like, it's not like 1 + 1 = 2. It's more something that, because like when you do a research project, you will select a certain number of participants, and then you can only, not even in that case, you can't prove what they do, but you can sort of make some conclusions about the group you have. But to do something factual linguistics, you'd have to analyze literally everyone in the entire world. And even then, there will be so many variables in terms of culture, language, gender, race as well, because obviously in sociolinguistics, these are variables in terms of how we speak, we communicate, and lots of other variables. So that's why it's kind of tricky to prove. So I'm getting warm, but that's why it's getting quite tricky to prove anything. Because of that. I'm simplifying it to the extreme, but that's essentially the whole shebang, I guess.
And when I say, or I think what I'm saying, because again, I've never at any point claimed to be any kind of linguistic expert or anything, right? The struggling linguist name has nothing to do with being a linguist. It's just a fun name, and creative name I thought was clever. My issue a lot of the times is that with social media or whatnot, everybody's an expert all of a sudden, right? And I've taken a few master classes, and from what I've gleaned, again, I could be wrong, from what I've gleaned, you don't really need to know anything to produce content and things like that, because some of the tips they give, it's like, hey, look at what are some of the popular videos in the field that you like are, and kind of like reproduce those videos. They're like, the work is basically done for you, and you just kind of like got to redo it with your own little touch and style. And to me, it's like, okay, yeah, I could do that. It's super easy. I could do that. But if you were to come up to me and be like, hey, I follow you and I think you're really cool and smart and blah, blah, and try to have an actual conversation with me, you would quickly realize, you'd be like, she has no clue what she's talking about. Like, she has no idea, right? that's how I see things. And I find it like disingenuous. So I don't really trust everything I see or just take it for granted just because some expert, quote unquote, says so, right? So I'm kind of cynical in that way. So I really see things differently. And when I say proof, I mean kind of like you said, like the bases that have been established for more or less anyone. Learning a second language willingly and consciously as an adult or teenager or whatever, it's different from learning your mother tongue. Like nobody can argue with that, right? And the manner in which we learn our mother tongue, unless we have an affliction of being like deaf or mute, right? It's pretty much in the same capacity. We really develop our writing skills and our reading skills and so on in school. So so that's the way I see it. And I see like a lot of stuff that we see on social media as kind of pointless, like having no goals. And half the time I'm just like, well, who is this supposed to inspire? Like, what is this? Well, how is this supposed to motivate me in some way? And I get the need for banter and little conversations here and there, but it's like, it's so much. And I just feel it's because it's just so much. And it's like pretty much because you follow different people, but then they start repeating pretty much the same things. And there are some days, I kid you not, in my thread anyway, it's like the same conversation by different people. And I'm just like, what? And there's just always so many variables, so many different opinions. And I think if we're all here, why don't we have actual proper conversations, right? I have loads of ideas for ways we can collaborate with each other and actually practice language through fun, not just talking about like racial stuff or bad things. That's not what I'm like trying to focus on, but anything, right? And I just think that we just need to be talking about things, something so much more than just tips and tricks all the time. It's like, yeah, okay, I get it. But my view is if you can successfully learn one language by yourself, you're fine. You can do it again.
Because the way you responded by when I say it's not, you can't say things factually, was that you implied that I didn't know anything about linguistics. So that was an assumption that you made. Is when we're talking about like the use of c'est and il est in French, you were saying that il est une femme. Elle est une femme américaine, then that wouldn't make, that makes sense, but it's not something we'd say in France. And then like there was two people joining in that were telling you that you can't say it, and we're still insisting that you could. And I think you were being very stubborn, to be honest.
It's quite possible I was being very stubborn. That is quite possible. I don't like to apologize for how people perceive how something I say comes off. Because people will have varying perceptions of that. But what I will say is I did not mean it in any condescending or degrading or way, or any way to say that you have no clue what you're talking about, because I'm well aware that you speak French, you live in a French place, and you teach it well. I'm well aware of that. So if that's how it came off, that's not how it was meant. I like to talk to people. For me, it's better to talk to people, having conversations rather than little bits and little chips and bits here. And when other people jump in the conversation, it's public, and that's fine. But sometimes they haven't read the beginning of the conversation, and I'm just like, oh, you're not understanding, and I feel as though they're not understanding what I was trying to say in the beginning. And then there's more thoughts that come in. We kind of sometimes digress on tangents, and then I get lost and frustrated, and I just keep going. Sometimes I'm just like, you should just really stop, just stop. Sometimes when I feel like something that's being told to me is bullshit, or can also be true at the same time as what I'm saying, I really get frustrated. And because I can't verbalize this and have real throwback, that's even more frustrating for me. So that's why I'm just like, well, let's talk about this, because it'll be easier to understand. Comme c'est une discussion qu'on pourrait faire une vidéo avec, expliquant les différences et les choses de même, which I find a little more useful than just going, this is this, and this is this, and that is that, personally.
It wasn't so much a game of, I was right and you were wrong kind of thing. It was more because actually, I remember, maybe, I don't know. We're not going to go through the tweets again. It was a long time ago. But basically, like I remember saying, I can't talk for, Quebecois French, obviously, because I've got no experience with it. I barely heard it in my life, to be honest. Well, a little bit, but anyway. But I was saying like in France is this way. And then I think he was still going for it. And like even the others were just like, what? And I think that makes it hard to argue with you, and I definitely understand the point of what you're saying in terms of it's very you're constrained when you're sort of typing and writing because Twitter limitations, the threads get lost and stuff. Like I definitely get that, but it's also about being able to say, okay, I was wrong. Like, well, I understand, and like just being humble, I guess.
Yeah, I could totally see what you mean. And again, I would agree with you. I can sound rather brute and sharp and whatnot, which was not the intention in that. But the reason I wouldn't say I'm wrong is because I see both things as being able to be true at the same time. So it's not that you guys are wrong. And if I said that, well, then I'm wrong for having said you guys are wrong. If that's what I said, I am absolutely sorry. And I'm wrong for having said that. But I wouldn't tell somebody that I'm okay, sorry, I'm wrong if I feel that both things can be true at the same time. Because there are situations in life, and that's life, where two things can be true at the same time, yet oppose each other.
I definitely agree. Like there's definitely perception going on, and always, you're going to say something and then 15,000 people can say, yeah, I agree with you. 50,000 others will be like, what the hell are you talking about? Like that's yeah. I also take this as something obvious. Like, I agree with you. Like I kind of take it, I don't take it, what am I trying to say? No, I just agree with it basically. But I think there's definitely things when you're talking that will indicate your tone. So for example, like, question mark, exclamation mark will sound like you're sort of expressing surprise, right? And also, like, I don't know. And something that you do, oh my gosh, it drives me nuts. I mean, it doesn't drive me nuts.
What? No, it probably drives you nuts. It's right. It's okay.
And when I was telling you that, linguistics doesn't prove or give facts. And then the thing you did is the Strawman fallacy. I don't know if you realize, but you do it all the time.
To be honest with you, that's something I'm just like, what the hell does he mean by that?
I'll explain. So basically the Strawman fallacy is when I say something, let's say I say, I like the color red. And then you go and you respond to that. Do you mean you hate the color green? That's so disgusting. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but that's literally what you do in that case, because I'm saying something, and then I think you jump to conclusion. Again, I'm not saying I never do it. That's not what I'm saying. Don't do a Strawman argument right now. But yeah, it's like, no, I'm joking. But it's literally, like if I say something and then you imply I say the opposite, and this opposite point, you make it extreme to sort of try to disprove my point. And that's a fallacy because that's not what I said. So you're attacking me on something I didn't say in the first place. Do you see what I mean?
That's the type of thing I think I would need to see in a follow-an example.
Right.
But yeah, okay, let's just, for argument's sake, let's go with it. Yes. Okay.
Let's just give this tweet an example. But I think that's the reason why I didn't want to have a live conversation, is because if you start a conversation and the other person will always twist one's word, and I know that's something you blame me for doing, but we can talk about this in a second. But if I feel like someone is going to twist my words and not going to be, I think the only way a debate can work and be fruitful is not so much when we agree with each other, it's more when each other are open to like listening to the arguments, and not just like, because the person disagrees, then you take it personally. So obviously then you respond from an emotional place, and then it just goes wrong because, when you're emotional, you're not thinking straight, if I may say. So that just can't go right, essentially, because then it gets annoyed. The other person is not heard properly. Then it just skyballs. Essentially, is that the phrase? Just blows out of proportion, basically.
No balls.
So, yeah.
No, but you're perfectly right on that, and because that happens when people are talking to each other, I'm just like, well, in messaging, especially in a limited manner like this, it's even bigger. That is amplified, right? So that's like, well, let's talk to each other. We might find we have a little less disagreements than we think, but I'm thinking one thing, you're thinking, I have one way of expressing myself, I should say. You have another, clearly. We're coming from different angles in so many variables between us, right? That at the end of the day, I think that perhaps we're probably saying pretty much more or less the same thing, but we're expressing ourselves very differently through a reduced manner, in a way where anybody could just jump in or out whenever, and it gets confusing when sometimes I'm answering one person in one tone, if you will, while I'm trying to answer another in another tone. You understand what I mean? So I'm just like, if we're sitting and we're having a conversation and we said, hey, you know what, let's all jump in Zoom and have this conversation, I think it would be a little less chaotic, if you will, right? And that's what I mean by, hey, if we can talk about it on Twitter like this, why don't we get together and actually talk and just see where the conversation goes. It doesn't have to devolve in screaming and arguments. I don't, you know, and things like that. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's my only point. Whether we agree or disagree, that doesn't matter. At the end of the day, to me, I can't get to know people if I don't talk to them, right? Because through social media, all I'm getting is an image, and I can only create whatever perception I have through the images being portrayed. Because for all the people I follow too, sometimes I'm just like, I don't really know who many of these people are. It's kind of like a Photoshop lifestyle, like I call it. Everything is always, you know, that's what I call it. I call it Photoshop lifestyle, the marketing angle thing. So I don't really know who they are, right? Or anything like that. And me, I've just always been that way, where it's like, I don't really care if you like me or not. I'm going to express myself. I'm going to say what I need to say. And that's that. I mean, I was asked if I think that people who are illiterate are less worthy or have less worth. And I'm like, I never said that. I wasn't trying to imply that. I didn't point a finger at any one person or at any group or anybody. I was simply expressing a thought that if you can't read and you can't write, that's called illiteracy. That's all I'm saying. I didn't invent the term. That was all I was saying. And I'm like, I felt like it got blown way out of proportion. Because I'm like, I'm just expressing myself. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I didn't speak about worth or value or anything like that. Ace was basically asking, when learning a language, if people lean more towards reading and writing or speaking and listening. And I was genuinely confused by the way it was worded and what the question was. That's why I replied what I replied. Like, I'm genuinely confused. Like, what are you trying to say? Because I'm like, if you speak and listen and you don't learn to read or write, doesn't that make you illiterate? It's just a question.
And why not just say, what do you mean?
Because I want to try to explain myself. Because if I were talking to you, I wouldn't simply say, I probably would not simply say, what do you mean? I'd be like, well, what? Because I'm trying to explain it to myself and trying to understand where you're coming from. So that's what I would probably say if you were right there and had asked that question. I'd be like, well, what do you mean? Because if you can't read or write, that means you're illiterate. So, and that's kind of how I message and stuff. It's kind of like how I talk in a way, and like how I'm thinking, which comes off really bad sometimes in messaging, but yeah.
So when you were talking about literacy, it was not so much the word illiteracy or literacy that bothered me, because they're quite objective terms. I mean, they're neutral in theory, because, you know, they have definition. But I think the issue is that, first of all, the word literacy has, in French, say charge lexical, I guess, like semantic load, I guess, because there's like connotation about literacy. You know, I was saying that, it's sad to say that, because, you know, some people are just, you know, illiterate, and that's for different reasons, whatever. And then you was implying, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were implying that I was encouraging mediocrity. And then the issue I had with this answer is that, first of all, and I know, you said it wasn't about native speakers, it was only non-native speakers, but the conversation came to that anyway. So for native speakers, like, it's quite a big deal, and I think it's dangerous. I mean, by saying dangerous, it doesn't kill people, it doesn't like.
No, I understand what you mean. I understand what you mean.
I mean, like, it's harmful in that sense, because it just contributes to the stigma. Because it's one thing to say, okay, people are literate, I'm going to create a program to, you know, help them, encourage them to access the community or whatever. But it's another thing to say, you know, they are in mediocrity, they should self-improve, it's their responsibility to learn how to write and read. To some extent, I would agree. You know, I think we all have some room for, you know, to do things in life in general. But the truth is that a lot of people don't have access to, you know, being able to read and write and whatever.
I completely agree with you. Okay. And this is what I mean by things get lost in Twitters and understandings get lost in Twitter. I was asking that about his original question, which was in language learning, which I take to mean the second or third or fourth or whatever language that you voluntarily choose to learn. Do you not learn to read, write, speak, and comprehend that language? That's what I was talking about encouraging mediocrity and encouraging people to be less than, if you will, because we're not talking about your mother tongue or where you come from and the unfortunate circumstances that you may have lived in order to just be able to, you know, even go to school if it's like third grade or whatever. So who he's asking that question of does not have limited resources. If you
Yeah.
are on Twitter, you are able to be on Twitter and social media, you do not have limited resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, in my mind, that's why I don't understand these questions. I'm just like, but I don't get it. I just don't get it. And here's the thing, let's say you learn that language
Take
solely like to
notes.
solely like to speak it and comprehend it, let's say, right? And then you happen to switch jobs or whatever, then you find out, hey, you speak Spanish? Oh my God, this is fantastic. We have a Spanish department there, and the boss is like, hey, we're gonna send you over to Spain. You're gonna start running the new head office. You're like, yeah, but I can't read or write. Like, you know what I mean? How does that look?
I don't think we should be judging people that decide to only speak a language. What I think, obviously the way I learn languages, I want to learn everything, the 4 skills, right? But what I do and what they decide to do is not something I should be judging. That's one thing I will say. But my dad is a non-native speaker of French, and my mom is sort of half native, I guess, of Portuguese. But they both are lacking in terms of their language skills. They'll speak to the 2 languages, fine. But my mom can't write Portuguese properly. My dad can't write French properly. Maybe not even read it. I'm not sure. He doesn't really read anyway. Like, you can't just say like it's disrespectful. It's just that it wasn't his priority. Like, not everyone will use language to just write or sorry, that's not what I mean. Not everyone will use language to write. That's what I mean. Some people will just speak it, and that's fine. We can't just say, you're half fluent. You're just fluent in speaking, and you can't read and write. And he can still function. He's been living in France for, well, how old am I? Well, 28, 29 years now. And he doesn't. And the only reason why he didn't develop writing or reading, maybe that's a little bit limiting, maybe, but that's because he didn't need to. He doesn't have to. Because of his job, he doesn't have a job where he has to write or read particularly a lot, or not long or very difficult French.
As an immigrant person, an immigrant family, I totally get that too. My aunt and uncle can't really speak or read or write French that well. Neither can my mom, or neither can most of the adults. But those were different circumstances, as you say. There were different circumstances. They didn't have what we have today. It wasn't pushed or out there as much as it is today. And again, when somebody like Ace, who's still very young, asks that question of his followers, he's asking it of this generation, of these people now. I'm not talking about the generation before who, for economic circumstances, lack of resources, which are all around and stuff like that. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm literally talking about who he's asking the question to when he says, when language learning, which again, in my interpretation, in my perception, is today, now, when I have the resources to do that, when I have the means to do that. I'm sure you've seen at least one or two reports that says the world is getting stupider, if you will, right? Or we're losing our ability to be able to communicate to each other. People don't know how to talk to each other anymore. We hear about these things in the news. Why? And I feel because it's true. Nobody really wants to talk. Like, how many people tell me, oh, Sonora, I'm here for you if you want to talk. And I'm just like, no, you don't. You don't want to talk. You want to message a little bit here and there when you have time, but you don't actually want to talk because, God forbid, you extend that sort of energy and things, right? So that is a bother to me. So the people he's talking to when he asks this question do not have limited resources. They have, in my opinion, no reason for not being able to read, write, speak, and listen when they choose willingly to take on this challenge.
So I agree with you. Like, the target audience is not people that just don't have the resources. However, when you're saying that it's not a good thing, that can contribute to people thinking that everyone should be, learning languages across the 4 skills. Therefore, they go out there and they. I mean, I'm not saying you have that kind of influence, in one tweet, but still, you could potentially reinforce that kind of idea that everyone should be, proficient in the 4 skills. So it's not so much like the first hand, if that's the word, people.
Sorry, the first what?
Not the first hand, but like the first people to actually read your tweet. But it's more like
I'm sorry. No, hold on. No, seriously, I seriously cannot understand the word you're saying. The first hand?
Yeah, first hand. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure if that's the phrase. Is this like British accent? First hand.
I'm like, wait, what? I don't want any misunderstandings here. So I'm just like, no, I really don't know what he's saying.
It's right. So yeah. So the first people that will read the tweet, like they might actually go around and spread that idea that, you know, if you can't speak or write a language or whatever perfectly, then it's not good, it's mediocrity, etc. And that was the only thing I was sort of attacking you on. That these thoughts, like, they're not dangerous for the first people that see your tweet, but more like when they go around and spread stereotypes or like negative ideas and that kind of thing. And that was, I mean, maybe I didn't make it clear, I guess, but that's why I thought what you were saying was dangerous. Again, dangerous, right?
Yeah, basic proficiency.
Why
right?
should though?
Huh?
Why should?
Because in my opinion, you chose this. So as a minority who, again, no, I didn't go through it myself, but even now today, people have to fight for basic education that the well-to-dos have in the same very country, in the same state, in the same city, that I think it's unfortunate those of us who do have just want to waste it or not take the full advantage of it that in that manner. So that's part of the reason why I'm so insistent that it's encouraging, or it's not productive to not be all that you can be. Because like I said, in no society anywhere around the world has not being able to read and write been a thing, an acceptable thing in any way, shape, or form. Right. And exactly. It's super sad. But again, I think with having literally the world at our fingertips and not trying to take full advantage, when you choose to learn another language, I think is a sad thing. And I don't really encourage that. I say, do the best that you can do in all skills.
I don't think someone that only focuses on one skill isn't trying to work to their full potential, because their full potential might not be to be fully proficient in that language. It can just be anything else. And that's very personal. You know, everyone can decide what's their full potential. I'm not seeing this as someone being lazy or disrespectful to the language or.
But again, you see, that's why, because like now I got to just explain a little bit why I have that point of view, right? So,
but do you see why I had a problem with how you phrased it, even if that's not what you meant exactly? Do you see how that's?
Yeah, I can understand that. And I can appreciate that. But I did not grasp that from just our Twitter interactions. Personally, as far as the language community is concerned, I don't really feel like I'm part of language community. And I feel like I'm not really gonna directly associate myself as such anymore. I'm just somebody who likes to live life and around different people and speak different languages, and that's pretty much going to be that, as I see it, because I find it a limiting in many ways, as I've said before. I wanted to address one thing, and one more thing here. That's when you said your bad experiences growing up Portuguese in France. I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because you had said, I don't know what it's like to be in your position, which I would disagree with, because I'm sorry, we're both immigrants to another country that does not speak our foreign language. I'm not saying my experience was worse than yours, and I wasn't trying to compare experiences in any kind of worse kind of scale. But a reason why my experience would probably be worse than yours is, one, I'm female, and well, actually, one, I don't look like the people whose country I immigrated to, and two, I'm female, right?
The reason why I said you couldn't relate is on the strictly speaking, in the sense that, and it's kind of obvious, and I think you acknowledged it in the tweet, but it's like, my experience is not going to be exactly like yours. And in that sense, that's why I wanted to say, when, you misunderstood, but that's why I said, like, no one lived it like I did. It wasn't like I had it worse. It's more like no one has walked in my shoes. I think we both know what it's like to be discriminated against, but like the things you'd be discriminated on would be physical, because you're a woman and you're black. But yeah, wait, what was your question? Can you just remind me? I completely forgot.
My question essentially was, why would you say that your experience was somehow the worst, or you've had it the worst than
Right, but I
anybody
didn't.
else.
That's why I told you. I didn't say I had it worse. Because
So the tweet says, and I'm sure some have it worse and I'll come across as a snowflake or whatever, but no one has gone through it like I did. Only I know. So that's why I really get annoyed when people imply that linguistic discrimination might be bogus.
and
So
explain before you say anything. So again, it's the same thing. When I said, but no one has gone through it like I did, I mean it literally, because no one went through it like I did.
this is a direct translation thing you're trying to do in your head, but as a
Maybe.
native speaker, when you say something like, no one's gone through it like I did, that implies that you've had it the worst,
No, I
right?
get that. Get that.
It's like no one played basketball like Michael Jordan did, which implies that he's the best, right?
Mm.
So that's how I took it. I'm just like, what? Like, how dare you, you presumptuous, pompous ass, which was literally my reaction looking at my phone, right? I was like, how dare you say such a thing? That is like, you are a white man. I went like all Louis C.K. on you, right? And I'm like literally sitting here going around like Louis C.K., you're a white man. Like, how dare you say such a thing? How
But that
dare
wasn't.
you?
But that wasn't what I meant for sure. But
Absolutely get that. But here's what compounds my attitude of like pushback is
right.
that I'm just like, you're a teacher, you're a linguist with a degree, you know, you speak English more than proficiently. It seems to be, I guess, other than at work or in France, there, the language in which you communicate the most. You don't get to play the language card. Like, oh, it's my fourth language. No, to me, again,
Right.
per
Right.
my
Right. I see.
perception of everything, I'm just like, you don't get to play the language card. No, you really don't. You really don't. Right?
Don't know. It's just how it is. Like sometimes I miscommunicate, and it's not like me trying to find a cop out. It's more like I generally will say things that people will not take the way I intended. I'm white, so when I go to Portugal, they're like, "Oh, you're French." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm Portuguese." Well, but you're white, because like Portuguese people, they're quite tan. My parents actually are tanned; they're not actually white. But yeah, like just physically, I don't belong in a way. And then when I'm in France, like because I'm white, so I should be French, right? There's no French blood in me, but still people think I look French. But I'm also Portuguese, so therefore I'm not really French because my parents are Portuguese. So you have like this back and forth, or I'm not French nor Portuguese, but I'm nothing pretty much. So it's
I
kind of a
can,
weird. Just see what I mean, like
oh, trust me, I can absolutely appreciate that. For one thing, again, like yourself, I live in the country that's not natively my own. The language I adopted is not natively my own. It's not generationally my own. I feel like I still don't feel like I belong anywhere. To be very honest with you, I don't feel like I belong. Like I'm still trying to find where the hell I fit, and that's probably part of the reasons that I want to be so linguistically varied, if that's a thing you can say. I don't know. Because I don't fit in anywhere. Like growing up here, like when I was younger, there was like my cousin who's half German and half black as well. So it's like there was always a white person there, basically, right? Um, at school, it's mostly white people, but as the years went by, like it got more and more immigrant or something. Half the class was like non-white by the end of high school, right? So it was an even mix. There's always been an even mix of everything. And then I had the weird challenge of sometimes it would be the English friends, then it would be the French friends, and very few of them crossed over and intersected and dealt with each other. So it was always like these different worlds that was a part of, because there was like, oh, the friends I saw outside of school or whatnot, and then the friends I saw at school, and then the way I lived life outside of school. If my mother wanted to take us anywhere or whatever, amongst her friends, they were generally, people from back home or whatnot. And then they talk with the patois, right? So I'd be exposed to that a little bit, but in my house, my mother didn't speak to us in that patois. She just spoke to us very white, as we say, very normally, right? And when I recently went back to my country in 2014, I had the worst experience. The worst. It was complete culture shock. Right? I swear the only way it could have been worse is if I had been white. I swear to God. But I was called foreigner the entire time. right? I was made fun of for the way I spoke. I was told to speak like them, but I can't. This is how I speak, right? I
Linguistic
guess.
discrimination.
Well, yeah, exactly. I'm guessing. I'm like. I guess I perpetrated a lot of linguistic discrimination because I found the way they spoke very not nice, not
Mhm.
proper, if you will. But again, that's my opinion. I'm not, I'm from there culturally. Yes, I was born there, but I grew up in a completely different world. As I was saying, I've had completely different experiences. We can't talk about the same things on the same level, right? What their whole high school education, some of us have by grade 7, sometimes grade 8, especially the more well-to-do you are, the more advanced your education is going to be. So things like that. So it really was a culture clash for me. And being Black didn't help nothing. It didn't help nothing. I was still foreigner. I was
I
still
guess
a
can
foreigner.
I guess you can be black but still white culturally. Yeah, in a way.
Dude, you don't even know how many times I was called Oreo cookie. My mother even referred to me as her white child because I didn't listen to reggae and soca day in and day out. I listened to like Blink 182 and Linkin Park and like Limp Bizkit and just all sorts of stuff, right? And my mother should talk. She would blast her Shania Twain like nobody's business, let me tell you. Um, I'm not saying my mother's racist. She's not racist or anything, but she'd prefer if I were like with a Black guy or whatever, which I think I've dated. Yeah, I've dated one of in my entire life. Diversity is just something I've always liked, just something I've always been around. I don't really. I think what people say when they say, "Oh, I don't see color." Obviously, you see color. I think what you mean is you don't think in color. Like
Hmm.
myself, I don't start having preconceived notions or judging people because of the color of their skin or wherever they happen to look like they might be from or whatever, right? It means when you open your mouth and I hear an accent all up in your grill, I'm like, hey, how you doing? Right?
For me,
That
that's just so interesting when people they see a black person, a Latino person, and they assume where they're from. Because for me, that doesn't make sense. Because obviously, I grew up in Paris, and then like I don't know, if I see a black person, I can't tell you where they're from, like by just looking at them. Obviously, I know they're not, they're not white because they're black, but like they could be French. Like I can't make this assumption. So like I don't know if you probably get that in more like maybe more des endroits majoritairement blancs, but like I don't know, like assuming a language based on the skin color makes no sense because, like, I don't know. Like, first of all, people don't assume I speak Portuguese because I'm white. So, by that just experience, I can't assume other people's languages by just looking at them.
again, my experience, I didn't really experience any real kind of racism. And sometimes people are like really shocked about my views about the Black community, and they're like, ah, like I've literally been told I'm against my own people and shit like that. Like it's insane. People might be surprised by what I actually think about a lot of things when it comes to racism or whatnot. But you
It's shaped
know
by
what?
your experience, isn't it?
But exactly, they've never done me anything wrong that I didn't deserve or didn't look for. Those sorts of things I didn't live through. I don't live. Not that people haven't said racist things to me, but it's happened so few times and so far between that I can't really complain. I wouldn't feel justified in complaining about it or anything. And for the times that it did happen, there was always somebody to stand with me or stand up for me straight up that I didn't even have to say anything. You know, I've been with friends and we've been accosted by the cops before, but it's generally been a mix of people. So I can't really say, hey, they were attacking one or the other because it's either we all got in trouble or nobody got in trouble. Most of the times, nobody got in trouble. They like took weed and little things like that, but they didn't arrest us or, throw us against cars and stuff like that, right? So I don't have, and I don't know what those experiences are like for people in America who say, just walking down the street is a hassle. I don't know what that's like. I don't run the other way. I don't think to turn around or watch myself when I see a cop car coming down the street. I just go about my business. So I have a very different view on that. And living in Quebec, for me, it's more a language issue, which is interesting that I should appear to be fighting you on the language discrimination thing, which I'm not. If at any point I said that it's not real or whatever, I'm sorry. It's not that I don't believe it's real. It's in the current situation of everything going on. If we want to be talking about discrimination, I think racial discrimination should be the forefront conversation over linguistic. Why, especially right now, since it's easier to approach such a sensitive subject, why it should be more spoken about is because in order for linguistic discrimination to occur, whether you're the same color or not, you must speak. You need
Yeah.
to open your mouth, right? You need to open your mouth. And that's the fact, is that if we're in a police lineup or whatever, and we're not allowed to speak and you need to describe people, you're going with what you see. You can't know what language they speak for sure, like you're saying, just because of the color of the skin or what they may appear to look like or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can only go off description. And if you're a racist and a bad intentioned person who's just hell-bent and taking down whatever race you don't like, well, then that's who you're going to point to, regardless of what language they speak, regardless of what language they sound like. Now, when they open their mouth and an accent comes out, that will just compound your prejudices and just add to those things. And then if you're a sexist as well, then you'll add the fact that, oh, she's a woman and she's black and she has an accent, she's definitely wrong. And you know what? He may be white, but you hear that accent of his and oh, he's gay. By God, we've got to stop this. There's always going to be a reason.
And I just wanted to address the thing about this linguistic discrimination. It's not that I'm not talking about the subject of racism. It's just that I made a conscious decision before I started my YouTube, when I started my YouTube, in fact, 3 and something years ago, that I wouldn't get political. First of all, I think it's two things. So first, I want to talk about these issues only if it's related to linguistics or language, because I think that's in line with my content. And second is my Twitter. I just want it to be my space for language learning because that's my hobby.
To start a conversation. That's literally what I'm not trying to argue with anybody. I'm not trying to prove a point where this person is wrong and that person is right. That's not what I'm just trying to have a conversation. I'm just trying to talk to people and get different point of views. At the end of the day, for me, it's not about who is quote right and who is quote wrong. Has nothing to do with that. It's just about talking with each other. But I can appreciate that, hey, you know what, I would have appreciated this a lot more if you, or would have been more receptive and whatnot if you had done it in DMs. I'm like, okay, cool, I could see that. And now moving forward, if there's anything, I'd probably stop and think about it a little bit more and probably send a DM to you or whoever the person is concerned. But I generally just, I wasn't thinking in the sense of, hey, let's make this a private conversation and whatnot. Okay. Yeah, and I'm super happy we actually got to talk. And like I said, I feel like we're more alike. All right. Thanks, Kevin. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.